I'm Anne Marie. I'm Anne Marie Juliano. I'm the past president and a fellow of the American Society for Engineering Management, and I'm so thankful to have you all here today for this webinar, especially during the summer months. I'm glad you all could join us. Today we have Meagan Pollock, and she is on the American Society for Engineering Management's Board of Directors. And we're very glad to have her here today to talk about a topic that is near and dear to her heart, um, and that she wants to share with us all. And it is involving an introduction to the positionality prism. Thank you so much, Meagan. And I hope you all stay engaged in the chat.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, welcome wherever you're dialing in from today. I'm excited to introduce this concept to you, Positionality Prism. And as Anne-Marie said, my name is Meagan Pollock, and I am based in a small town in Texas, in Orange, Texas. My company is called Engineered Organizations, but I've got a big change on the horizon. On Monday, the 16th, I start at NVIDIA. So I'm returning back to my engineering roots and looking forward to a bold new chapter working for a company that I am really excited to work for. So, what can you expect today? We are going to have a little bit of an introduction to the concepts. I'm going to spend a good chunk of our time talking about the positionality prism, and then we'll spend some time at the end sort of wrapping up and reflecting on what we learned. And if you want a chance to win a copy of the audiobook, stay to the end and we're going to have a little quiz, and whoever is the leader of the quiz based on time and correct answers, I will send you a code to get a free copy of the audiobook of Magic Mirror. And so I also want to say I am going to be using some Slido polls. So if you've never used Slido, that's okay. I recommend if you've got a smartphone, you can just, when I open it up later, you can just pull open the QR code reader or your camera, and then you don't have to use a QR code every single time the Slido page comes up. It will just refresh for you there. I would love it if you all are active in the chat. So if you want to go ahead and say hi in the chat and tell me who you are, where you're listening from, and maybe your role, I would really appreciate that. And then at any point, if you have any questions or want to answer one of my questions, you can raise your hand or unmute to do that. So I hope that you'll be really active in our conversation today. Now, to get started, I want to make sure I explain the cultural reference and the title. So I lead the topic of the session with Magic Mirror on the Wall. And this is a trope most famously associated with the fairy tale Snow White. And so the evil queen in Snow White uses a magical mirror to inquire about who is the fairest in the land. And so here's a quick little trailer, 30 seconds to help you picture this.
So while you work, magic mirror on the wall. Who's the fairest one of all?
So while the phrase is most recognizable from Disney's version, both the one from back in, I think, the 30s and then the one that was released just a couple months ago. The phrase originates in the 19th century German fairy tale published by the Brothers Grimm, and it was originally written in their version as mirror, mirror on the wall, but Disney changed it to magic mirror on the wall. So it's just important for me to always explain any cultural references that we're talking about. So I'm curious what you think. What do you think makes the best leader of all? And so you can, again, open up your smartphone, or if you don't have a smartphone with a camera to read the QR code, you can go to slido.com and then enter in the number 5485522. And I want to hear from you. So what do you think makes the best leader of all? If we had a magic mirror and we're going to ask it, magic mirror on the wall, what makes the best leader of all? What are some of those qualities? What do you think? What are some of the qualities that makes the best leader of all? So we've got the first contribution here, and that's of transparency. I love that. That's one of my core values. Emotional intelligence. Much of what we're talking about leans very closely to emotional intelligence. Being a good listener. That's absolutely. What else? Honesty, calmness. What else? Good communication skills. Yeah, so I really encourage you all to participate if you've never used Slido. It helps me know up here that four people have contributed to the poll. And so you can continue contributing until advance the slide, and then we'll move on to the next question. So accountability. Okay, love these responses, and I want you to hold on to these. Somebody that promotes their people. I read that as someone who's not only advocating for the people that they work with, but really actively seeking to help advance them, both in name and perhaps in title. So we've got a couple of nods to honesty. So thank you so much for all of your contributions here. I want to see what this last person is writing, and then we're going to move forward. Somebody who understands their own limitations, and we've got a big nod to empathy. And empathy is a big part of what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you so much for those contributions. And again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. I really appreciate that. So, if these are the qualities that make the best leader, my question is, what kind of leader do you want to be? Do you want to motivate and inspire people to do their best work? If so, it only, in order to inspire people to do their best work, that only happens when people feel valued, included, and affirmed. So, how do you do that? So I love the phrase that's on the screen, wherever you go, there you are. And there is an unknown debated origin of this phrase, but when I think about this, I think about wherever you are, whether you're in college, whether you're in industry, whether you're a faculty, whether you're in your community organization, wherever you are, you're there. You're the constant wherever you go, right? And so it begs the question to me, if wherever I go, there I am, then who am I? So, who are you? What influenced who you are and how you think and how you move through life? So, today we're going to be talking about a tool and some practices for helping you better understand who you are so that you can be the best leader that you can. Now, in the abstract that you saw, this is based on the book Magic Mirror that I just released earlier this year. And so if you haven't read it, that's fine. I certainly encourage you to read it. But I want to kind of give a background frame that sets up the conversation for the positionality prism that we're going to be talking about. So let me start by introducing the sort of concept of the book, Magic Mirror. Now, it's a modern fable. It's a story that is designed to teach and guide you through relatable scenarios and characters that introduce 9 actionable practices to deepen your self-awareness and enhance your leadership and basic good human skills. So let me tell you about Mira. She's the protagonist in this tale. She's like someone you might recognize. She's a talented, hardworking, and pretty successful by all usual measures. She's doing well, but lately, in the beginning of the book, she feels stuck. She's noticing some tension within her team, some misconnections, and a nagging sense of that she's missing something. So then Mira has this encounter that she sought out, and we'll call it unusual, but it's an intriguing mentor figure named Alara. Alara introduces Mira to something she calls the magic mirror. But here's the kicker. The mirror doesn't just reflect what you look like on the outside. No, it shows you something deeper. It shows how the world sees you. It reveals those unnoticed biases and hidden assumptions that you didn't even know that you had. So in the book, Mira steps up for her first interaction with Alara in the mirror, skeptical but curious, and she sees what shocks her. She sees how her identity, her background, experiences, privileges, even things that she hadn't considered privileges, how they shape every interaction, every leadership decision that she makes. That's personhood, the first part of the positionality prism that we'll talk about. Next, Amira sees something else, how her own perspective narrows. She notices that she tends to filter out certain voices or ideas without even realizing it. Not because she intends to, but because that's how perception works. It's subtle. It's shaped by what you've lived and known, quietly steering how you interpret everything around you. Finally, Mira sees power, not the overt kind with titles and corner offices, but the everyday power hidden in who she knows, how comfortable she feels walking through the world, and even how she moves in professional spaces without a second thought. Alara challenges her to see that her power isn't just personal. It's backed by bigger systems and structures that she hadn't fully recognized before. So, seeing all of this in Magic Mirror isn't easy. Mira has to grapple with questions like, how did I miss this and what do I do now? But Alara gently pushes her forward. It's not enough to see these things. You've got to act, Alara tells her. You've got to share your power, disrupt the barriers you now see clearly, and build bridges for others. And that's exactly what Mira sets out to do, guided by something called the Positionality Prism with three facets: personhood, perception, and power. And each facet gives her the tools to lead differently with clarity and intention. The rest of Mira's journey unfolds with ups and downs, mistakes, and breakthroughs. Very human, like the rest of us, and a lot of learning along the way. The magical journey that she takes, guided by Mira, helps her to see herself, others, and the world differently. She meets many interesting characters along the way to help her be a better leader, neighbor, friend, and more. But if you want to see how Mira uses her newfound awareness and how the positionality prism helps transform her leadership in life and could transform yours, you'll have to dive into the rest of the story. Today, we're going to focus on the 9 positionality practices that she learns from Alara through the magical mirror. So, with that introduction, I want to ask you, how many of you are familiar with the concept of positionality? So, it could be a term that you're familiar with. So you can rate it on the Slido poll as like you have no idea what it is, or you are an expert in it. So what do you all know about the concept of positionality? So we've got one honest person. They've never heard of it. They have no idea what it means. I appreciate that. What else? Okay, so it looks like we've got a few nods to this is a brand new concept. Well, I'm excited to introduce it to you. So we've got one person who's maybe heard of it, but so lots of room for improvement for us. Okay, all right. So again, the vast majority of you are new to this concept. So let's dive in and talk about what positionality is. Positionality is that the unique perspective through which individuals experience, interpret, and engage with the world. It's also how the social and political context creates your identity in terms of race, class, gender, sexuality, and ability status, and more. So I chose to write specifically about positionality because understanding who we are, how we see the world, and how power influences our interactions is critical, yet it's really often overlooked. So over the years through my business, I've created tons of free resources, and my positionality reflection guide has been the most downloaded resource from my website by like 100-fold. And so to me, this was a signal that people are curious about this concept, that it is gaining steam and the zeitgeist, and people are interested to learn more. And so in writing the book, I decided to frame positionality as a prism, like this. Because just like a prism refracts light into distinct colors, examining our positionality helps us to see clearly the various influences shaping our perspectives and actions. So how I define positionality prism is this. Positionality prism is the unique perspective through which individuals experience, interpret, and engage the world through the combined, multifaceted lens of personhood, perception, and power. The positionality prism, it offers a way to explore how identity and experience shape our perceptions and actions. And this is important because positionality influences access to resources, decision-making power, and opportunities for advancement. Understanding positionality helps us disrupt inequities through intentional action and advocacy. So, by using this positionality prism, individuals can deepen their self awareness, challenge systemic barriers, and lead with empathy and equity. And so, I hope that you see a connection between that and some of the answers that you provided in that first initial prompt of like what makes a great leader after all. So, the first part of the prism is personhood. Understanding who you are is the foundation of positionality. This theme focuses on exploring your identities, recognizing the roles that shape your life, and understanding the factors that create advantages or obstacles. It answers the question, do you understand all the parts of who you are? The second part is perception. How you see the world is influenced by your identity. This theme encourages examining your filters, just like we wear glasses to help us see more clearly, broadening your understanding through empathy, and recognizing that others' reactions may not be about you. This theme answers the question, how do you see the world? The third part is power. Power dynamics shape interactions and opportunities. This theme guides you in recognizing your own power, learning to share it with others, and using it to challenge systemic barriers. It answers the question, what shapes your interactions, influence, and opportunities? So for each of the three parts, there are three practices for a total of nine. I'll talk in more detail about some during this hour, and for the sake of time, I'll just kind of skim over some of them because we can't go into all of them in really great detail. But you can read or listen to the book or download the free resources that I'm going to be sharing in the chat to learn more. So, in summary, it's about personhood, which is looking in, perception, which is looking out, and power, which is taking action. So the first link is this Positionality Prism, and you can download this resource to follow along in our talk today. So let's start with personhood. So personhood, there are again three practices: explore your identity, assess salient roles, and identify bridges and barriers. We're going to start with explore your identity, and this is really the sort of heart of the book and the major practice and skill and exercise that you are encouraged to take on. So in the book, Mira begins her journey by asking herself, what kind of person do I want to be? And she grapples with the discomfort of self-reflection. And so the practice that she learns from Alara and through the mirror is that she needs to unpack the different dimensions of who she is and reflect on how these aspects influence her daily experiences and interactions. And so you can do that too. So let's talk a little bit more about what that means. So if I were to ask you who you are, that you are many things, right? You might say that you are a daughter, you could be an engineer, you could be all kinds of things. But there are also many diverse dimensions of our identity. And this list here on the screen, this is not exhaustive. But if you worked through this list, you could identify a descriptor or a description or some personal history for each of these boxes. And so for many of us, some of the terms in that matrix might be new or confusing. And this resource here, the Social Identity and Privilege Reference Guide, can really help you. So it lists 25 dimensions of identity and then offers 6 pages of definitions and descriptions for the primary sources of identity, including race and ethnicity, gender, immigration or citizenship, ability, socioeconomic status, and sexuality. And so this book, this worksheet you can reference here. It's also inside the Magic Mirror workbook that I'll share a link to later on as well. And so when we begin to think about forms, parts of our identity, the exercise that Mira learns in the book is to create a social identity map. And it looks like this. There are 3 tiers to the social identity map. And you can map each out in various ways. Like you can use a tree diagram, which is what this is, a wheel diagram, or a simple table as is provided in the Magic Mirror workbook, which is free to download. So the first step is that you select an identity. So for me, I might start with gender. So I am a woman, and you would write that in that top box. And then you start to reflect on the life impacts. How has that identity, how has my gender as a woman, how has it affected my life? What opportunities or challenges did it create for me? What values are tied to it? And how does it shape your interpretation of events or interactions? And I'm going to show you some examples here in a second from the book. And then the third, or you explore the emotions for each life impact. You identify the emotions that brings up now, or maybe it did in the past. So these might include positive, neutral, or difficult feelings, and then you'll write those below. And then after you complete that, you come back and create another diagram for a different identity. So let's look at Mira's. So again, you can read more about this in the book. She talks through these. So she identifies her gender as a woman. She is also an engineer in the book. Um, and so she talks about how she faced the life impact. That's what this tier here is some challenges working in a male-dominated field. And then the resulting emotions that she feels from that is determination, but also isolation. She also a life impact is like there's a societal expectation to overperform in order to counter some of those stereotypes. That creates both stress and a little bit of resentment for her that she shares. And so you can see another value here. We'll click over to the next one. The next one, she talks about race. So she recognizes that she is white. However, she has an ethnic heritage as a Mexican, but she has a very strong disconnection with that heritage based on how she was raised. And so she recognizes that she gets some societal privilege and institutional ease from being a white person. And she feels both gratitude and a little bit of guilt for that. And so she talks about in the book how she has the tension due to her Mexican heritage, but a cultural disconnection from that. So again, these two are the life impacts, and then the details here she's written or sketched are the emotions. So the point here in looking at your identity, thinking about the impact of these identities on your life and then how it's led you to feel, it's recognizing that who you are, these social identities that you've been assigned, prescribed, or born with, they affect you. Like we don't live in a vacuum. We don't live in a colorblind world. We live in a world where all of these parts of who we are affect our lived experiences. They affect how we are taught, how we learn to see what we see. And so this is really the foundation of positionality because it helps us begin to see all of the ways that we move through the world. Next in the book, she talks about how she was raised middle class, listing the impacts of what that meant for her family. And so again, you can see these in the handouts. And again, she lists some hidden disabilities. Also in the PDF of the Magic Mirror workbook, and I need to jump back and grab that link for you. But I also have lots more examples of different identities and life impacts. So this might help you begin to understand some of the ways that your identities have impacted your life. And so again, this is really just the first part of understanding your positionality is recognizing your identity. It starts by questioning who you are and envisioning the person that you aspire to become. And so this takes a little bit of work. It's an exercise, right? And it's an exercise to start the work, but then it becomes an ongoing practice of recognizing who you are, how it's impacted how you're showing up, and maybe some hidden emotions or unhidden emotions about how those things show up. This is really a really important part of the positionality work. The next is assessing salient roles. So this is recognizing that parts of who you are show up in different places at different times. So let me give a very current example. So my new team at NVIDIA is primarily based in Israel, and there's another person on the team who lives in Greece. So historically, in my work environments, on my immediate teams, my citizenship and nationality weren't salient because everybody on my team was based here in the US. But I'm recognizing that as I'm about to start this role, that my citizenship and nationality will now play a different role in my work dynamics and my work relationship than I've experienced. And so again, it's recognizing and it's just being aware. It's that awareness of recognizing who you are and how you show up in a different place. And that sometimes as you go through the positionality prism, these identities might give you a different perception. They might give you more power than you recognize. And that, to me, if I want to be a great leader, if I want to be a great colleague, if I want to be a great work partner, then I need to be cognizant of my identity and how I show up in different places so that I'm not taking advantage of power and privilege that's assigned to me based on a place where I was born, right? So I want to, again, we're going to have to kind of gloss over some of these. The next one is about identifying bridges and barriers. And so in the book, Mira reflects on how her privileges act as bridges and how systemic barriers hinder her and others' opportunities. And so the practice that I want to encourage you all to build is to learn to determine how aspects of your identity provide benefits or create obstacles, and then reflect on how those dynamics impact your opportunities and relationships. And so a key thought here is like it's impossible to reflect on positionality without considering advantage, or what we can call privileges, and disadvantage, which is oppression. And so if these are new concepts to you, or concepts that come sort of loaded with misconceptions from the zeitgeist, I encourage you to again access the Social Identity and Privilege Reference Guide, because this guide is a type of cheat sheet to see which groups are advantaged and disadvantaged along identity dimensions with examples. So again, there's 25 in there. So a kind of snapshot of this is from the historical, and again, this might be very US focused, but we look at sort of the dimension of race in the United States and in most places. The groups with advantage are people who have a white race. Groups without advantage are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And then the resource also helps you understand what are some of those advantages of the privilege, which we call bridges, or the disadvantages, which we call barriers. And then finally, this last column, which really connects to the last chapter of the last practice in the book, and that's learning to identify the system of depression, the ism that's involved. And so again, I encourage you to have a look at this and begin to learn and build your own understanding of identity and systems of power and oppression. So the takeaway here for this particular practice is that when we learn to recognize your bridges, aka our privileges, and our barriers, or also known as our oppressions, it enables you to act intentionally to foster inclusion and equity within your team, within whatever environment that you serve. So I want to pause here for a reflection from the group. I want you to share, and this is an anonymous, so your name certainly won't be tied to this. Share an example of how one social identity, whether your race, gender, class, something, it doesn't matter, how it has impacted your life and any resulting emotions or feelings that you might have experienced. So just take a minute to reflect as if you're going to start doing this exercise. Reflect on how one social identity, and if you're having trouble accessing the Slido, you're welcome to drop your response in the chat. So take a minute to reflect. So somebody says that they have a disability, and so I wonder for that person, how has that impacted your life? And how has that impact led to emotions or feelings that are part of your life? So someone types here their age, they've felt belittled. And that could be both a young person or an older person. So that could go for both ways. Someone says their citizenship status has a negative impact on them, especially with so much that's happening here in the United States right now. Um, it's very scary for a lot of people, and what that means for them. There's a character in the book that Mira reflects on that talks about citizenship as well. And so hopefully some of those stories, if you get to read the book, are really relatable. Okay, so it looks like we've got a couple more people typing. I want to see what they contribute. Ah, introversion in an extroverted world. Yeah, that impacts us in really powerful ways. I'm sort of ambiverted. And so I get to try to perform in both ways. The older I get, the more introverted I get, I think. All right, thank you all for your contributions here. So I encourage you to reflect on this. Um, Somebody says race makes them more powerful in the office to make influence on collective decisions. Yeah, so positionality is about understanding these parts of who you are and then how it impacts you. Like this person says, it gives them power to make influence, and I hope that you wield that power with goodness and good intent. So you can continue to add to this, but I want to just skim over to this workbook. So if you download the workbook, then you'll be able to, there's a guided exercise and handout that you'll be able to do. Let me jump back up to get all of the links here. Okay, so now the Magic Mirror book, the Magic Mirror workbook, there's those links in the chat for you. Um, okay, let's see. Somebody said a modified disability. Okay, so you're updating this. Creating feelings of not being capable enough. Yeah, so again, parts of who we are, our lived experiences, parts of our identity influence us in really powerful ways. Thank you to each of you for contributing these. And I encourage you all to continue to reflect on your positionality and those identities. So now we're going to move on to perception. This is the second part of the positionality prism. And the first practice is to check your filter. So I love the sort of language of like the rose-colored glasses and thinking about how our lived experiences tint how we see the world. It tints and really changes the prescription, will you, of the way that we see because of our lived experiences. Unless you have learned and built a practice to sort of question and be curious and begin to ask about other people's lived experiences, unless you've intentionally begun reading about other cultures and other, ways of knowing and doing, sometimes our filters can be really narrow. We can have blinders on and not understand the experiences of others. And so the key part of this perception is learning to check your filter, learning to reflect on how your identity and how your experiences shape how you see the world. And then recognizing when you make quick judgments, understanding the roots of those judgments, and considering how your filters impact your behavior. If I was, I'll share some of my personal journey. I grew up in Southeast Texas. I left for a couple of decades and then moved back 3 years ago. But I grew up in a pretty sheltered environment that was not particularly diverse. And so I had very little understanding of other ways of knowing and doing. I had very little understanding of the impact of understanding what systems were and the impact of those on other people. And so I was raised with very much a sort of bootstraps mentality, like just work harder and you'll get what you want. We all have the same opportunities, like this kind of mentality. Well, that filtered much of my adult life until I began to really question, until I took off those rose-colored glasses to begin to see the world differently. And this is part of our positionality. It's sometimes asking when you interpret something, it's asking yourself, is this true or am I filtering this through my own lived experience? And so, again, this is that practice. And so, when we examine our filters, it reveals those unconscious biases that shape our perceptions and decisions. And if you are new to the concept of unconscious bias, I've got a free course on my website that teaches the neuroscience behind unconscious bias that you can access. I encourage you to do that as well. So the next part of the perception part of the prism is to expand your perspective. In the book, Mira learns to approach situations empathetically, challenging her assumptions by asking the question, what else might be true? And I'll teach you a little trick here in a second. And so this really connects to much of what you all shared before, right? Like this notion of empathy and its importance. And so empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. It's connecting to the emotion another person is experiencing and not the actual experience. The key here is it's the ability to understand. And so in order to understand and share the feelings of another, we have to have that open-mindedness. We have to have that awareness to begin to understand that their lived experience may be very different than ours. In Teresa Wiseman's research, she talks about four qualities of empathy, and one of those is perspective taking. The second is staying out of judgment. The third is recognizing emotion, and the fourth is communicating connection. I'm not going to teach the whole lesson here on this, but the key thing here is that the ability to see the world as another person sees it is that perspective taking. It's not about agreeing with their perspective, but about understanding how they may have come to that perspective. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and looking at situations or problems from their viewpoint. And so again, perspective taking is so powerful, and I want to introduce you to this little tool. The phrase "what else might be true," one of my mentors taught it to me years ago, and I'll drop a link to an article on this in the chat as well. But she challenged me one day when I was like, I don't know, in a tailspin. I was really young. And she said, Megan, what else might be true? Because I had like honed in on one explanation for something. And so this was such a powerful tool for me that I use it all the time. And I use my sort of 5 finger countdown here because there's 5 words and what else might be true? What else might be true? And I use it as a way to begin to come up with, usually you have one story. So I want to come up with 4 other stories or explanations for why someone might be doing something or thinking something, or before sort of leaning into one snap judgment. And so this is a tool that I encourage you to try when you find yourself honing in on like this person is doing this because of this. Well, what else might be true? When you come up with 5 different answers, 5 different possibilities, it reduces the potential bias that you might have and honing in on one explanation. So I encourage you to try this tool, and you can certainly read more about it if you're curious. So the takeaway here is that expanding our perspective, it creates space for empathy and deeper understanding in your relationships. And so this is really important for you as a leader, whether, again, when I'm talking about leader, I'm not talking about whether you have a manager title or not. We are all leaders. So if you begin to use perspective taking and create space for empathy, you will build better relationships with people. And so I encourage you to try this practice. And then the third practice along perception is seeing beyond yourself. When you build the practice of understanding positionality, when you begin to understand your identity, your lived experience, and how it influences how you move through the world, when you then it helps you to start to see that other people have positionalities as well. Their lived experiences influence how they move through the world. And it gives you more grace for other people. So sometimes you might have an interaction with someone that you don't understand. And you might be keen to sort of zone in on one sort of solution that, like, they're doing this because they don't like me. But sometimes when we're using positionality, if we reflect on who we are, our identity, maybe this is happening because I am a white person and this person has had really bad experiences with white people and they don't know that they can trust them. So it's not about you per se, it's about their lived experience and sort of compounded trauma based on their race, right? And so this is a really useful tool. So again, recognizing that people may not be reacting to you, they're reacting to a lifetime of experiences with people who hold your identity. So I want to give a quick check-in here as we wrap up the perception, the second part of the positionality prism. And I want to ask you, which of the perception practices might help you the most right now? Which of the perception practices might help you the most right now? Checking your filter, expanding your perspective, or learning to see beyond yourself? So we've got one person contributing to see beyond yourself, another couple of people. Yeah. So it looks like that's resonating with people. I think in general, when we just take a perception of like, hey, it's not about you, right? It could be about you, right? So there's some self-awareness there, but it could also not be about you. And when we practice and lead with empathy and kindness and grace, it helps us to create better environments that are inclusive, where people feel valued, included, and affirmed. All right, hey, thanks for your contributions to this. Now we're going to move on to the last part of the positionality prism, which is about power. So the first in the book here, Mira reflects on how her advantages, like the privilege and access to resources, how it shapes her influence. So somebody said in one of the polls before, they recognize that their race gives them power. That's what this is. It's recognizing that it's giving you potentially more opportunity in a space that you didn't earn, right? That comes simply from the color of your skin and your lived experiences. And so this is a really reflective step of constantly reflecting and asking what's happening in a space. Could this be because of my identity? And then the next part is learning to do something about that. And so the practice here is reflecting on where your power comes from, such as privilege, social connections, or those access to resources, and then understanding how your power affects your experiences compared to others. So again, I encourage you to check out the Social Identity and Privilege Guide because it helps you begin to understand this. And this tool is I've been doing this work and research for 15 years, and it distills really everything down into an easy tool that I wish I had because all of this work that I've published in the book and hope people take forward is because of my own experience trying to be a better person, trying to understand and learn about systems. And I really struggled. And I have a PhD in this. And not everybody has time to get a PhD in this. And so I wanted to shorten the time between what people can introduce to the work and really begin to make change within their own lives and spheres of influence. And so this is really the summary and culmination of all of that work that I hope that you all find useful. And so, again, we have to learn to recognize when we have power. And then there's some humility in that as well, of saying, okay, well, I may have power that I didn't necessarily earn completely, that could be benefited by some part of my identity. And then the question is, what will you do with it? So in the book, Mira learns to step back and amplify traditionally marginalized voices and to create opportunities for others to lead. So often we think about, this work of it's one thing to recognize you have power, but what are you doing to create space for other people to access that same power, right? That's true power, is using what you have and sharing it with other people. So how are you using your influence to make space for others? And a tool for doing this is asking who isn't being heard, who isn't present, who isn't being heard, and then actively working to amplify marginalized voices. And so sharing power is an act of equity that enables others to thrive and to strengthen the collective progress. So the last one, and I've been told that this chapter in the book is a doozy, because it's really about fully understanding the systems. And again, as I alluded just a moment ago, as a white person, understanding systems was very challenging for me because I was raised in an environment that was sort of very monoculture. But the practice here is like learning to disrupt barriers. And to do that, we have to learn how to see the systems. So I love this quote that's based on a talk that David Foster Wallace, he gave a speech to a graduating class at Kenyon College, and he included this parable. And I like it because it helps to understand how, like, if you experience any modicum of privilege, as I have, it's often really challenging to see the system around you because it was built for you. And so, this adage, it's hard to tell a fish that the water is wet, is a really useful tool. So let me read this to you. There are two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" Right? Because they have no idea. The environment was built for them. It's where they live. So the systems that we swim in and the air within them that we breathe are laced with the dominant ways of knowing and doing. If we don't get choked up or drown, it's hard to understand why others do unless we intentionally learn, look, and listen. So, a simple example is that right-handed people rarely have to think about whether the scissors they pick up will work for them because, in most cases, they are built for right-handed people. So, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you are most likely right-handed. So, as a white person raised by my family and the community my parents chose, I wasn't taught to question the systems like housing, healthcare, finances, education, because they worked fine enough for my family. And so when we think about systems, again, I'm an engineer. So systems are about input and output. The Systems are designed to get the results they get. So if we're dealing with inequities, if we're dealing with injustice, it's because the systems were designed for that. And so if we want to create and lead change, we have to change the systems so that we can get different outputs. In the book, through the story of narrative, teach about systems thinking for systemic change. And I've got a couple of activities that I'll share here in the chat with you if you want to learn more. And so the 4I framework for understanding barriers is a really useful tool. And I devised this representation of the 4I model as this interlocking system, but I have pulled this from the research in a variety of different ways. But it shows how there are four interlocking systems: ideological, interpersonal, and institutional. These are all external things that can create internalized um, privileges or oppressions that people experience. And so ideological is that foundation. It's the set of dominant beliefs and values in our society that define what is normal or acceptable. So, for example, the belief that individualism is more valuable than collaboration creates norms where some cultures or ways of being are excluded. And these ideologies, they reinforce an us versus them thinking, and they shape how we view who belongs and who doesn't. The next is interpersonal oppression or advantage. It happens in our day-to-day interactions. It's how these ideological beliefs play out between people. And this includes subtle or overt actions that can exclude or marginalize others, like who gets invited to meetings or who is recognized for their contributions. These interactions often uphold the existing norms and reinforce feelings of exclusion. The third source of external power and privilege or oppression is institutional. And it refers to how these ideologies are embedded in the policies, practices, and structures of organizations. Think about the hiring processes, workplace norms, or educational policies that seem neutral, but actually favor certain groups over others. For example, a promotion process that values assertiveness over collaboration might unintentionally exclude those from more collective-oriented cultures. And then the fourth is internalized oppression or power or privilege. And this is when people from marginalized groups internalize these ideologies. And it can also be internalized privilege is when people from dominant groups internalize the ideologies that they're better than or that they deserve more. And so whatever the force, for good or bad, people begin to believe this about themselves. From the oppression side of things, this leads to behaviors like self-silencing, conformity, or even adopting the dominant group's values at the expense of their own authenticity. So, by understanding these four levels, again, this is from, years of teaching this. This is one of the most powerful aha moments. And again, I encourage you to read the additional resources because it helps to really begin to see how the systems are structured and how they are all at play and reinforcing one another. So when you understand these four levels, we begin to see how power, privilege, all these things are systematically shaped by larger forces and how barriers are often deeply embedded in our culture and in our structures and in our ways of knowing and doing. So our job to be the better leader that we want to be is to recognize these barriers at all four levels and work to dismantle them in our classrooms, our workplaces, and our communities. So I will leave you before sort of shifting gears to wrapping up here. I love this quote by Janetta Sagan. And she says that silence, she wrote, silence in the face of injustice is complicity with the oppressor. You may have heard this simplified as silence is complicity. And to me, this is such a motivator to begin to understand systems. Because if we don't begin to understand systems, we may become complicit in upholding the systems that harm others. And so part of our positionality is recognizing the ways that we may be unintentionally participating in these systems and what are we going to do about it? And so the takeaway for this final practice is that lasting change comes from questioning and disrupting systems of inequity. And inequity here, just defined, is any lack of fairness or justice. It's an imbalance of power and privilege. And so change doesn't happen unless more people begin to see the systems and make intentional efforts to change the systems. So, reflection here is I want you to think about one way that you can either share or disrupt power and your team and your environment wherever you are. Think about one thing that you can share, one way that you can share or disrupt power within your sphere of influence. And I'm happy to take some questions now, before we go to our sort of quiz that gives you a chance to win a copy of the audiobook. So sharing knowledge. Yeah, I talk a lot in the book about social capital and cultural capital and recognizing that you may know things through your own lived experience that people from other lived experiences didn't learn. And that social and cultural capital gives you access to many things. Yeah, certainly inviting people to events, making sure that people are invited and welcomed and given a seat at the proverbial table. Somebody says providing options, supporting ideas from those. So I want to say I learned this a few years ago, and I can't remember where. And I was really intentional when I wrote the book because I do talk a lot about voice in the book. But what's interesting is like people have voice. We're never giving people voice. Their voices may have been silenced, their voices may have been reduced, or we've had a loud megaphone going so that we can't hear them. But we want to create space for people so that their voices can be heard. Providing practice inclusive decision making. Yeah, these are great examples. I really, really appreciate these contributions. Um, Before we move to the sort of final quiz and giveaway, any questions? I don't think I missed anything in the chat. Any questions? So again, we are going to do a really short, should be easy quiz. So I'll give you a chance to get your Slidos ready. So if you haven't done the Slido yet, it's not too late. I think we've had about 7 people participating, but if you want a chance to win, um, open up your phone or go to slido.com and type in this number there. So, all right, Anne-Marie's in. We got to wait for a few other people to join the quiz before we get going. All right, we've got 3 people, 4. All right, come on. And I won't, it doesn't give me your contact information. So whoever wins, you need to make sure that you put your email in the chat. You can message directly to me if you want. Um, I don't know if you can do that, but just message in the chat and then I will send you the promo code to get the book on Audible. All right, anybody else? Last chance. Last chance. I got 8 people, but there's 16 people in the room. Come on. All right. So bear with me. We're gonna start this quiz. Okay. So the first question, you have 30 seconds. What is positionality? Is it the act of assigning tasks based on someone's job title? B, the unique perspective through which individuals experience, interpret, and engage with the world? Or C, a structured technique for setting quarterly business goals? All right, so time's up. Everybody got it right? That's fantastic. Okay, well done. So, next question. What are the 3 parts of the positionality prism? Planning, process, and performance, productivity, profitability, and promotion, or personhood, perception, and power. So speed matters here, folks, because whoever answers the quickest, it bumps up your ratings. All right, 9 out of 9 have voted. Okay, the correct answer is yes, personhood, perception, and power. All right, why is positionality important for you as a leader? Which of these is true? Waiting for two more people to respond. 10 seconds. One more person, you got to respond. Okay. All right, time is up. Everybody got their vote in. Um, the answer is A. It helps you recognize biases, navigate power dynamics equitably, and foster inclusive environments. So let's check it, the leaderboard. We got one more question, but so far, Chris Hogbin is winning at 29 seconds. So this next question, there is definitely a right answer to this, but it's a bit of a gimme. So the question is, will you read or listen to Magic Mirror by Meagan? All right. One last person to vote. Okay, everybody's voted. Of course, the answer is absolutely. So, all right. So it looks like the winner. Oh, Tyler. Tyler jumped to the. Oh, so Tyler and Chris tied at 33 seconds. So I will send Tyler and Chris, both of you, put your emails in the chat so that I can send you a free copy of the audiobook. I really happy to give that to you. Okay, so let me write that. Tyler and Chris Hogben. Thank you for participating in that. Hopefully that was fun. So the sort of final takeaway here is back to the original prompt. Magic mirror on the wall. What makes the best leaders of all? Well, the best leaders are the ones who are willing to truly see themselves, not just as they are, but through the eyes of others. They're reflective about their identities. This is personhood. They're aware of how they see and interpret the world. This is perception. And they are conscious of the influence they carry. That's power. But most importantly, they don't stop there. The most effective leaders turn reflection into action. They intentionally question assumptions and invite diverse perspectives and use their power responsibly to open doors, to amplify voices, and to disrupt barriers. In other words, the best leaders practice positionality every day, not just thinking deeply, but acting deliberately. So as you look into your own magic mirror, remember that clarity of insight combined with intentional action makes all the difference, not just for you, but for everyone that you lead. So, final reflection here is to think about three things that you've learned. This is just good teaching practice, right? Give you a chance to reflect on what you've learned. Think about what have you learned, what will you do differently, and one immediate action item. One immediate action item. All right, so you got that. I want you to share one thing. This is the last prompt of the day. Share one thing from your reflection. Something you learn, something you'll do differently, or one an action item. Take a minute to reflect before you shift gears and move on to something else today. Really think about what are you going to take away from this last hour together. All right, Cameron says they want to practice positionality. Rajesh says empathy towards others. Another contribution in the chat is to create varied spaces for opinions and ideas to be heard or read. All right, we're just at the hour. I'd love for you all to continue contributing to this. I want to, somebody says Anne-Marie says being more kind based on the complexities of where each individual is coming from. So I'm going to jump back to that, but your feedback is important. I'm going to drop a link here in the chat where you can evaluate the session. Go to engineerinclusion.com/thanks. Um, and then you can evaluate the session. You can get a certificate. You can email me at mp@engineerinclusion.com or find me on LinkedIn. And so again, really, really grateful for all that you all have contributed to this last hour. I can hang on for a few minutes if there's any questions. And again, thank you to the American Society for Engineering and Management for inviting me to do this talk. And if you are interested in joining our efforts around creating inclusive leadership within ASEM and within the field of engineering management, send me a message because we're trying to build a coalition of people who are interested in this work within the organization. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate y'all. Again, I'll stick around for a few minutes if you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask. Thanks, Anne Marie, for your thoughts in the chat. All right. All right, Chris and Tyler, I got your contact information. So I will send you those links today. Thanks, George. Appreciate it. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, June. Appreciate it. Thanks, Jacob, Julie. Thanks, Cameron. Thanks, Nee. Thanks, Rajesh. Thanks, Anne Marie. Thanks, Angie. All right. I think we can close it up today. Bye, y'all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you. Bye.